Jerry Jeudy, this might not be as secure as it looks. Because what the Cleveland Browns are doing right now at wide receiver, it's not normal, it's not casual scouting, and it's definitely not a team that's comfortable with what they have. 7. That's how many wide receivers they've already brought in for top 30 visits. 7 out of just 30 total. Think about that for a second. Most teams spread those visits across multiple positions. They stay balanced. They evaluate everything. But the Browns, they've locked in on one position, and they're going all in. And when a front office moves like that, it's not random. It means they've already made a decision internally. Something in that wide receiver room isn't working, and they're not waiting around to fix it. Reports suggest they could take a receiver early in the draft, come back for another in the middle rounds, and still explore trades on top of that. That's not adding depth. That's a reset. Which brings us back to the real question. If the Browns are preparing to completely reload this position, who exactly are they preparing to replace? Because once you connect those dots, this situation starts to look a lot bigger than just draft visits. 7 wide receivers. That's the number. And the more you think about it, the more it stands out. Because in the NFL, top 30 visits aren't random. Teams don't waste those slots. Every single one is used to evaluate players they're seriously considering bringing into the building. So when the Cleveland Browns use 7 of those visits on one position, that's not normal. That's not balanced scouting. That's a message. Most teams spread those visits across needs. Maybe a couple linemen, a few defensive players, a quarterback, a receiver or 2. It's usually a mix. But this is focused. 7 wide receivers out of a limited number of visits tells you one thing very clearly. The Browns are not satisfied with their current wide receiver room. And they're not even trying to hide it. Because if this were just about adding depth, you'd see 1, maybe 2 visits at that position. But 7, that's a front office locking in. That's them saying, we need to fix this now. And it doesn't stop there. Reports suggest they're not just looking at one type of receiver either. They're bringing in a range of prospects, different skill sets, different roles, different levels of production. That's important, because it means they're not just searching for a backup or a complementary piece. They're evaluating options to reshape the entire room. And when you combine that with everything else they've done, tendering players, bringing in return specialists, adding competition at the bottom of the depth chart, it paints a very clear picture. This isn't a tweak. It's a reset. And here's the part that really matters. Teams don't make moves like this unless they've already evaluated what they have internally and decided it's not enough. That decision doesn't get announced publicly, but it shows up in actions like this. Because front offices don't operate on hope. They operate on projection. And right now, their projection of this wide receiver group clearly isn't where it needs to be. Which means one thing is coming next. Change. Real change. And when that kind of change starts at a position like wide receiver, it doesn't just affect the depth chart. It reshapes the entire offense. And this is where things start to get personal. Because when you look at all these moves together, one name naturally comes into focus. Jerry Jeudy. Now to be clear, this isn't about saying he's not talented. It's about what the Browns really think his role is moving forward. Because teams don't act like this when they believe they already have a true number 1 receiver. They just don't. If you're confident in your WR1, you build around him. You complement him. You add pieces that fit what he already does well. You don't bring in 7 potential replacements. And that's what makes this situation so interesting. Because based on how the Browns are moving, it doesn't look like they see Jeudy as that guy. At least not in the way a true top receiver is usually viewed. There's been a lot of discussion around his fit, with some analysts suggesting he's more effective as a secondary option, someone who can create mismatches, operate in space, and thrive without the pressure of carrying the entire passing game. And if that's the case, then the Browns are missing something critical. Because every offense needs that one-player defenses have to account for on every single snap. The one who changes coverage. The one who opens things up for everyone else. And right now, it doesn't seem like Cleveland is convinced they have that. Which explains the urgency. Because this isn't just about adding depth, it's about finding that difference maker. And here where the pressure comes in. If the Browns draft a receiver early, that player isn't coming in to sit. He's coming in to compete immediately. If they add another in the middle rounds, that's more competition. If they make a trade, that's even more pressure. Suddenly, the room gets crowded. Targets get split. Roles get challenged. And a player who was expected to lead the group now has to prove he belongs at the top of it. That's how fast things change in the NFL. And here's the reality no one says out loud. Front offices don't wait forever. If they believe there's a better option out there, they go get it. And right now, everything the Browns are doing suggests they're actively searching. Not just for help, but for an answer. Which means for Jerry Jeudy and everyone else in that room. This isn't just another season. It's a test. But here, where it becomes impossible to ignore. This isn't just about Jerry Jeudy. This is about the entire room. Because when you step back and look at everything the Browns have done, and everything they're planning to do, it starts to feel like a complete reset is already in motion. Not a small adjustment. Not a let's add one more piece. A full overhaul. Think about it. They've already brought in multiple wide receivers for visits. They've tendered players like Malachi Corley. They've added depth pieces, return specialists, and younger options who can contribute in different ways. And now, they're stacking even more potential additions through the draft. Early round, mid-round, and possibly even trades on top of that. That's not a team tweaking a position. That's a team rebuilding it. Because when you attack a position from every angle like this, it usually means one thing. You don't trust what you currently have. At least not enough to move forward with it as your foundation. And here why that matters. Because wide receiver isn't just another position. It directly impacts everything. The quarterback, the play calling, the spacing, the ability to create explosive plays. If that room isn't strong enough, the entire offense feels it. And clearly, the Browns believe that's been the case. So instead of waiting for development, instead of hopping things improve, they're forcing change. And when you force that kind of change, the ripple effects are huge. Because suddenly, no one's role is safe. Not the starters, not the backups, not even the guys who thought they were locked in. Every new addition brings competition. Every draft pick brings pressure. Every move raises the standard. And that creates a completely different environment. One where nothing is given. Everything is earned. And that's exactly what this front office seems to be building. A wide receiver room where performance decides everything. Not contracts, not expectations, not past reputation, just results. And once a team commits to that kind of reset, there's no halfway point. Because either it works and the offense takes a major step forward, or it doesn't and even bigger changes follow. But here's the part most people are missing. This isn't just about wide receivers. It's about the identity of the entire offense. Because when a team goes this aggressive at one position, it usually means there's a deeper issue underneath. And for the Browns, that issue has been consistency, especially on offense. Over the past few seasons, this hasn't been a unit that you can rely on week after week. One game, things click. The next, everything stalls. Drives disappear. The run game struggles. The passing game feels disconnected. And that kind of inconsistency doesn't just come from one player. It comes from the system. Because a good offense isn't just about talent, it's about balance. Being able to run the ball when you need to. Being able to stretch the field when defenses crowd the box. Being able to create easy opportunities instead of forcing everything. And right now, it feels like the Browns are trying to rebuild that balance from scratch. You can see it in the way they're structuring things. A stronger emphasis on play action. A push to create explosive plays downfield. A system that needs receivers who can separate, create space, and turn short gains into big ones. But here's the catch. That kind of offense only works if all the pieces connect. Because you can bring in all the wide receiver talent you want. But if the run game isn't respected, defenses won't bite. If the protection isn't solid, the quarterback won't have time. If the timing isn't there, the whole thing falls apart. And that's why this situation is bigger than it looks. Because while the focus is on wide receivers, the real goal is to fix how the entire offense operates. To create something more reliable, more explosive, more difficult to defend. And that's not an easy fix. It requires the right players, the right system, and everything working together at the same time. Which is why the Browns aren't just making one move. They're making multiple, trying to solve the problem from every angle. But that leads to a bigger question. Are they focusing on the right solution? Or are they fixing the symptom instead of the root problem? But here, where the debate really starts heating up. Because not everyone agrees with what the Browns are doing. In fact, some analysts are looking at this situation and saying something completely different. They're asking a simple question. Why focus so heavily on wide receivers when the real problem might be in the trenches? Because if you look at some of the most successful teams in the league, there's a clear pattern. They build from the inside out. Strong offensive lines, homegrown talent, players they draft, develop and trust to protect the quarterback and establish the run game. And when you have that foundation, everything else becomes easier. Receivers get more time to separate. Quarterbacks have more time to read the field. The run game becomes a real threat, which opens up play-action opportunities. It all connects. But if that foundation isn't solid, it doesn't matter how many weapons you have. We've seen it before. Teams load up on receivers, stack talent on the outside, but without protection, the offense never fully clicks. The quarterback gets pressured. The timing breaks down. And those weapons, they never get a real chance to shine. That's why some people believe the Browns might be approaching this the wrong way. That instead of going all in on wide receivers, they should be prioritizing the offensive line, especially with the kind of system they're trying to build. Because if you want to run play action, if you want to control tempo, if you want to create explosive plays, it starts up front. Always. Now, to be fair, this isn't a one or the other situation. You need both. You need protection and playmakers. But the order matters. And that's where the disagreement comes in. Do you build the foundation first? Or do you bring in the weapons and figure the rest out later? Because right now, it looks like the Browns are leaning heavily toward weapons. And if they're right, this offense could take a major leap. But if they're wrong, it won't matter how many receivers they add. Because without that protection, without that balance, the same problems could show up all over again. Which makes this decision a lot bigger than it seems. But what if this isn't just about fixing a weak position? What if there's a bigger plan behind all of this? Because when you see a team go this aggressive, this focused, it usually means they're not just reacting. They're preparing. Now, to be clear, nothing has been officially confirmed. But there's been growing buzz around this situation, with some reports and fan discussions suggesting that the Browns might be planning a larger shift in how their offense operates. Not just new players, a new identity. And if that's true, then these wide receiver moves start to make a lot more sense. Because maybe this isn't about replacing one guy or adding depth. Maybe it's about building a system that relies heavily on speed, separation, and quick decision-making. A system where receivers aren't just catching passes. They're driving the offense. There's also speculation that this could be tied to the quarterback situation. Different quarterbacks require different types of weapons. Some need big-bodied receivers who can win contested catches. Others need route runners who create instant separation. Others thrive with players who can turn short throws into explosive plays. And if the Browns are adjusting their offensive approach based on that, then rebuilding the receiver room becomes a priority. Again, that's speculation. But it fits the pattern, because teams don't invest this heavily at one position unless it's central to what they're trying to build. And right now, everything points to wide receiver being a major part of that vision. There's also another angle to consider. Sometimes, when a team aggressively brings in competition, it's not just about finding new talent. It's about sending a message to the current roster that nothing is guaranteed. That performance matters, that roles can change quickly, and that if you're not producing, someone else will get the opportunity. So whether this is about a new system, a quarterback fit, or simply raising the standard, one thing is clear. This isn't random. It's intentional. And once a team commits to a strategy like this, the results, good or bad, are going to show up very quickly. And now we get to the part that actually matters. What does all of this mean when the season starts? Because everything the Browns are doing right now, it's not just off-season noise. It's setting the tone for what this team is going to look like in 2026. And one thing is already clear. This wide receiver room is about to be completely different. Not just in terms of names, but in terms of competition. Because if they follow through on what they've shown, drafting receivers early, adding more in the middle rounds, maybe even making a trade, this turns into one of the most crowded position groups on the roster. And when that happens, nothing is guaranteed. Not targets, not roles, not even starting spots. Every single player in that room is going to have to earn their place. And that changes everything. Because when competition gets this real this fast, players respond differently. Some elevate. They sharpen their roots, improve their consistency, and prove they belong. Others, they get exposed. Because there's no room to hide when new talent keeps coming in. And that's exactly the kind of environment the Browns seem to be creating. A pressure system. One where the best players rise naturally and everyone else falls behind. But this isn't just about the receivers. This impacts the entire offense. Because if this reset works, the Browns could suddenly have more speed, more separation, and more explosive playmaking than they've had in years. The passing game opens up. The run game benefits. The quarterback has more options. Everything becomes easier. But there's also a risk, because bringing in this many new pieces doesn't guarantee success. Chemistry takes time. Timing takes reps. And if things don't click early, the same issues could show up again, just with different players. Which is why this season feels so important. Because this isn't a slow rebuild. This is a team trying to fix a problem quickly. And when you move that aggressively, expectations rise just as fast. There's pressure to perform, pressure to justify the changes, pressure to prove this was the right direction. And once the season starts, there's no more guessing, no more projections, just results. And those results will tell us everything. And this is where everything reaches its breaking point. Because what the Browns are building right now, it's not just competition. It's a pressure cooker. And once it starts, there's no slowing it down. Because think about what's about to happen. New rookies walk into the building, hungry, fast, trying to prove they belong from day one. Mid-round picks with something to prove. Maybe even a veteran addition who already expects a role. And then you've got the current group. The players who thought they had their spot secured. Now suddenly, nothing feels safe anymore. Because when a team brings in this much competition at one position, it sends a very clear message. We're not satisfied. And that message hits differently inside the locker room. Because now every practice matters. Every route matters. Every dropped pass matters. There's no room for coasting. No room for figuring it out later. You either show up ready, or you get replaced. And that kind of environment reveals everything. Who can handle pressure? Who can stay consistent? Who can improve when the stakes get higher? And who can't? Because in a crowded room like this, there's nowhere to hide. Reputation won't save you. Past performance won't guarantee anything. You have to prove it again and again. And here's the part people underestimate. This pressure doesn't wait for the first game. It starts immediately. Training camp becomes a battle. Practices turn into auditions. Every rep becomes a chance to move up or fall behind. And for players like Jerry Jeudy, that spotlight gets even brighter. Because when expectations are high and competition is rising, you're not just playing to perform. You're playing to keep your role. And the moment someone else shows more consistency, more explosiveness, more reliability, the depth chart can change instantly. That's how fast it moves. Because in the NFL, teams don't wait around hoping things improve. They act. And right now, the Browns are clearly preparing to act if they need to. Which means for everyone in that wide receiver room, the clock has already started. And once it's ticking, it doesn't stop. So when you step back and look at everything together, this doesn't feel like a normal offseason anymore. It feels like a decision has already been made. Because the Cleveland Browns aren't just exploring options at wide receiver. They're attacking the position aggressively. And when a front office moves like that, it usually means one thing. They're done waiting. They're done hopping things improve. They're ready to force change. And that change is going to impact everyone. Because this isn't just about bringing in new talent. It's about redefining roles. Who leads the room? Who gets the targets? Who becomes the go-to option when the game is on the line? All of that is about to be decided again. From scratch. And that's what makes this situation so interesting. Because if the Browns are right, if they find the right pieces, build the right chemistry, and finally create a balanced, explosive offense. This team could look completely different. More dangerous, more consistent, more capable of actually competing at a higher level. But if they're wrong, if the offensive line issues still show up, if the chemistry doesn't click, if all these new additions don't translate into real production, then nothing really changes. And suddenly, all these moves start raising more questions than answers. Because in the NFL, aggressive decisions bring aggressive expectations. There's no hiding from that. But here's the biggest takeaway. This isn't just about wide receivers. It's about direction. The Browns are choosing a path, a clear one. And now everything depends on whether that path leads to results. So now it comes down to this. Do you believe this is the move that finally fixes the offense? Or are they focusing on the wrong solution? Let me know what you think. Because one thing is certain. This situation is about to get very real, very fast.